the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
And welcome to Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. We've been a little bit of a hiatus, but now we're back. We got the gang all back together to talk about the major issues of the day. The impeachment, President Donald Trump, more problems for Attorney General Curtis Hill. The governor unveils his agenda, and also what's next for 2020. And so join us in studio, our good friend, Libertarian Mark Rutherford. Mark, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Democrat Kip Tew. Kip, good to have you back.
Hey, glad to be here.
Eric Berman, political reporter for 93 WIBC Network Indiana. Eric, my friend, good to have you here.
Good to be here.
And newest member of the Indiana Issues family, Cam Carter, Republican strategist. Cam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, gentlemen, so let's start about the big news of the week as we record this. For the third time in American history, we have a president being impeached by the Congress. As we record this program, the articles of impeachment have not officially been sent over to the Senate, so we're just about there. Kip, let me start with you. Your thoughts on where we are as a country with impeachment, and where do we go from here?
Well, there's been some talk the last couple of days about whether or not Nancy Pelosi is delaying to send it over there to give herself some negotiating power on how the terms of the trial will occur in the Senate. That'll be interesting to watch here over the holidays. I believe they're in recess now until the first of the year.
January 6th, I think.
So I don't know that anything particular is going to happen until after the new year. Where we are as a country, I can't find a time when I've felt worse about where the partisanship is in the country. I would have liked to have seen a few Republicans. Obviously Justin Amash was a Republican until he was seen as a heretic, so he still has conservative principles. But I like to have seen a few more of them vote their conscience. I mean, privately, everybody tells you they don't like the guy. Privately, you have congressional folks who have conversations with Republicans in Congress who say this guy's terrible, but they're all so afraid of their base that they're afraid to do something. And to me, I don't know what power is worth if you don't stand it up at a time like this. So there's, people can debate, I suppose, the facts, but the transcript itself and the statements by his chief of staff said we do it all the time, get over it, and then they started to walk that stuff back. I mean, I don't really see how people like Jim Banks and Susan Brooks, who I know in the past have been very critical of this person, and now fallen in line. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Cam, let me get your perspective as a Republican, as a conservative, someone who talks and deals with Republican circles. What's going on? How are Republicans? Do you think it is just partisan Democrat attacks, or is there something there?
I have to agree with my friend Kip. There's an awful lot of partisanship involved here, and if you're looking for a Republican to defend the president, you should have invited another Republican on this program. I think where I see Susan Brooks and the Jim Banks and some of the partisanship and not seeing Republicans stand up is the Democrats are, I think, right on substance on what occurred here. I think the facts and evidence bear that out, but perhaps wrong on process in terms of rushing it, due deliberation. I'd love to hear what John Bolton has to say. I'd love to hear what Mick Mulvaney has to say about this. But I think the ours may be, miffed at the process. That's maybe why they locked in. I think there is also worries about what the implications might be in the Republican primary. But I think they're wrong on the substance. If they think that subverting the national security and foreign policy of the United States to your own personal political gain is not a high crime and misdemeanor within the meaning of the Constitution, I would beg to differ. And so I think we're going to see a lot more partisanship, unfortunately, and it's going to roll right on through next November. And where as a country is where we were when Donald Trump was first elected in November of 2016, divided.
Let me get Mark to chime in on that, particularly on the procedural part of this whole thing, because it seems like this has always kind of been on sort of two tracks. There's the substance of the issues of the obstruction, abuse of power, obstruction of Congress, but there's also been sort of that procedural track about witnesses being called. And I think it's interesting that on the one hand, one chamber complains about the process and procedure. On the other hand, the other chambers look like they're about to do the exact same thing.
Well, if you look at the procedure set up in the Constitution, there's no guidance whatsoever other than historic fact and what England used to do on these type of things and what we've done in the United States over the last 250 years. So basically, it's whatever they want. And there's a big part of me that sees the House being upset with the Senate, upset with the House. We're talking the majorities in each one. And maybe that is fine. They try to work it out. They try to make it happen. And I'm kind of calloused about impeachment because looking at impeachment, unless you've got bipartisan support, and you can look and see that everybody's very separated, whether it's justified or not, to me is not the issue. What matters is that the people aren't clamoring to 2/3 themselves for this, it looks like. It may change. We saw that with Nixon, where it started off, a lot of people defended him, and then over time, they began to realize, oops, there's a major problem here. But I look at impeachment as a pure political process, which it is, and until the people really are behind it, and he's got a strong base that isn't behind it, and people count votes. Senators, congressmen of all types, House members, they count votes, and they're counting votes right now. And it has nothing to do about who's right or who's wrong, in my opinion.
Let me get Eric to chime in on this, because I was doing a little bit of historical reading. And like I said, we have basically 3 impeachments in the nation's history. No president who's ever been impeached has ever been removed from office. So from that perspective, once again, does it show, with Mark, that you have to really have the public support there to do this. And in this sort of divided climate, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the 3 impeachments, and let's throw Richard Nixon into this. Obviously, he was not impeached because he resigned first. But all of those have been partisan. The votes are very close to party lines on Andrew Johnson, on Richard Nixon in the Judiciary Committee, where there was a vote. On Bill Clinton, there were only 5 Democrats who crossed over to vote yes. So there were as few as 5 Republicans crossing over to vote no in one of the articles. But for a very partisan process, this has been even more partisan. You throw out the 2 party switchers, you had 1 person crossing over. It's a polarized time that we're living in. It is not as inconsistent with the past as it might seem, and if Nixon had gone forward, it seems clear that would have been overwhelming and bipartisan. It's more so, but maybe not as far removed as what we've seen through history.
Before we change gears, gentlemen, just real quickly here, would it have been better for just to skip the impeachment altogether and just let since this is a political process, just have the voters just make the decision at the ballot box come November?
Well, I mean, I'll chime in first. No, I don't think so. When you have a high crime and a misdemeanor, I think it's your constitutional duty to uphold the Constitution, and I think that. I know there's a big talking point out there that Democrats wanted to impeach him since January of 17, and sure, some did, but Nancy Pelosi didn't, and Steny Hoyer didn't, and the leadership of the Democrats in Congress knew that there was a high political price to pay to go through the impeachment process. So they're doing this because they believe they have to. They're upholding their constitutional duty.
It's a terrible predicament, and this idea of sitting on the articles of impeachment and not sending it over to the Senate. I don't think that plays the Democrats' hand at all in this. Just from a pure political analysis standpoint, that's kind of untenable. If you're doing it because it's your constitutional duty, you don't have a lot of leverage with an intransigent Mitch McConnell in the Senate.
I think it's worth trying to negotiate. I agree with you in the end. You do have to send him over, and I think she will. But I think she's trying to gain some leverage, and never underestimate Nancy Pelosi and her ability to get things done in Congress.
No, that's true.
And I see a lot of centrist Democrats in the House who are worried about getting reelected. Here's my callous cynicism coming up again. And I think Pelosi's got 30 or 31 Congress people in the House who she's worried about. How do I keep them happy? But Nancy Pelosi has always impressed me. She understands politics. She understands strategy. And so that could be part of it, is she's trying to solidify those 30 or 31 and say, no, you're not going to get defeated. Which, quite frankly, I think that from a pure strategy standpoint, whether it's they should do it because it's a constitutional violation or not, I think it's a compelling argument that if you're statesman, you do stuff even if it's going to hurt you politically. But from the other standpoint of, I think it hurts the Democrats on there because I just see it solidifying this 40-45% base of Trump. And that means if he gets through this and he gets to running for re-election, he only has to get 5 or 10 people out of 100 to decide, well, I'll go for him, and he starts winning states left and right. So they're in a real interesting position.
Eric, let me get you.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian here. I don't think this is going to affect the election results in November at the congressional level very much one way or the other. I mean, those 30 or so centrist Democrats that Mark alluded to, that was a courageous act for them to say, yeah, this could get me in trouble at home, but I'm voting yes. I'm not sure it gets them in as much trouble as the general perception, and certainly not the Democratic Party as a whole. Number one, we have a polarized country. The Republican districts are Republican districts. The Democratic districts are Democratic districts. There's the occasional case like Joe Cunningham in South Carolina. His vote may come back to haunt him at the ballot box. But Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, who got a lot of publicity, she had a whole article on her town meeting saying, look, this is why I'm voting yes. Michigan is a Trump state in the same way that you could say Indiana was an Obama state between 2008 and 2012. I think it's more of an outlier. I'm not sure Alyssa Slotkin is in as much trouble as people might think, and I think that's going to apply to a lot of those folks who had a hard call to make.
You are watching Indiana Issues, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. Our guests today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Kip Tew, Eric Berman, political reporter at WIBC Network Indiana, and our newest member of our panel, Cam Carter, Republican strategist. Gentlemen, another big item while we were away, the Indiana Attorney Disciplinary Commission, some recommendations for Curtis Hill, wanted to suspend his law license for 2 years based on a groping incident and sexual misconduct that was alleged to have happened after Sine Die. The Attorney General, their side, have submitted things saying, "Hey, may have been boorish behavior, but not criminal. Had nothing to do with the practice of law." The recommendations have been made. Of course, the Supreme Court will make this final decision. Mark, as a fellow attorney, sometimes lawyers do get in trouble for non-lawyer behavior. But also, this is a situation where there never were any criminal charges filed.
That's right. There wasn't any, and this is on that fine line which scares attorneys, and it has nothing to do with whether you like Attorney General Hill or not, and that is, I like our current Supreme Court. I like the people on it. I think they do a very, very good job, and they have a very hard job that they do quite well overall. The problem is, what are the rules? What are the lines? I mean, we have the ethical rules, but they are properly written, in my opinion, a little broad because it's hard to get too specific. But it's like, where do you step over the line when it's non-attorney-related conduct? Or was it, as Attorney General, is he always an attorney? I mean, those are the questions that are out there. So it scares attorneys on what they're going to decide on this and where we're at. Drunk driving is pretty easy. It's usually non-attorney conduct.
Or shooting somebody in a White Castle parking lot.
Or shooting, or yes, yes, those things are
getting shot.
Or getting shot at. Yes.
Picking a fight.
Yes, picking a fight and being really, out on the town and overdoing it. I mean, that's what the evidence was determined to be. So, those are more clear-cut things. But this is one where, okay, where is the line? We're now in an area where, if you agree with the facts as alleged by the Disciplinary Commission, maybe it's just boorish behavior, but is it more than that? Obviously, the Disciplinary Commission took the position that it affected his role as Attorney General and as an attorney.
Kim, let me get you to chime in because, like I said, once again, we're in a like Mark said, we're in sort of an odd place in the sense that there were no criminal charges filed, like say, a drunk driving or battery or assault. But at the same time, the Disciplinary Commission said, this is the Attorney General. We hold you to a higher standard because you are a public official.
Yeah, well, I think charges weren't filed because the special prosecutor acknowledged the behavior. I think the Attorney General himself has acknowledged the behavior to a certain extent. And it's, that old lawyerly saw, litigator saw, it's not what I know, it's what I can prove in front of a jury in a court of law. Well, in this case, the jury's going to be the disciplinary commission or ultimately the Supreme Court, and I have to agree with Mark. I trust them to interpret our laws. I trust them to handle this matter in the end. I think it was a tough call, and at a human level, some people are asking, do I want my Attorney General to behave in this manner? Most will probably say no. That verdict can be rendered in the first instance by the Supreme Court. If their decision comes before, the June convention or summer convention of the Indiana GOP, which there are people angling in the water, I think you just had in your cheat sheet, Abdul. Shameless promotion here.
Somebody was polling delegates.
Someone was push-polling delegates. Someone was push-polling delegates.
Let me get Kip to chime in here. Kip, on the Democratic side of things, what does this do for that race between Jonathan Weinzappel, former mayor of Evansville, Karen Talion, state senator up in Gary,
She's from Porter County.
Porter County, yeah. In their efforts to unseat Curtis Hill or whomever the nominee might be come November.
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting several months as we go forward. Obviously, what happens next is the person appointed by the Supreme Court is going to hear the evidence from both sides on this. I think Jim Voiles is Curtis Hill's lawyer, and the disciplinary commission's on the other side. So we've heard from the disciplinary commission, and then Voiles, I guess, gets to have his day, and then Myra Selby, one of my partners, will make the decision and send it up to the Supreme Court, and then they get to take it or not take it. And that's going to take a couple of months, I believe, if I know what's happening. And so on our side, on the Democratic side, there's a little bit of limbo because both candidates don't know exactly who they may be running against, because if he is suspended from the practice of law, the argument certainly is there that he should be relieved of his duties, because the Attorney General has to be a lawyer, and at that point he's not a licensed practicing lawyer in the state, so there could be an argument about that. So from our side and our standpoint, it's a little bit like John Gregg's dilemma the last time he was running against Mike Pence, and then all of a sudden he was running against Eric Holcomb.
Yes, indeed.
And so that could be the scenario again, and so it's an unknown at this point. And I would think that the woman would have the advantage in a Democratic convention if Curtis Hill is the nominee. It's an easier contrast, I would say, but we don't know who the nominee is going to be at this moment.
Eric, does life get interesting for Republicans at their convention? Because, like Kip just said, and everybody here, they don't know what the recommendation is going to be. Will it be a suspension? Will it be a reprimand? If, let's say, it's a 3-day suspension, okay, technically you have to step down as Attorney General, but do you get it back when it's over? We're just in a lot of uncharted territory.
Yeah, I would think that they might have a decision in 6 months, but it's not going to be like it's next week, and it's not impossible. It could take longer than 6 months. And so if this is still in limbo come convention time, that puts delegates in a very difficult situation. I think you've put your finger on something, which is the disciplinary commission didn't hold back on this recommendation. A 3-day suspension, yeah, that becomes more of a political issue. If Justice Selby and then the Supreme Court side with the disciplinary commission and suspend indefinitely, minimum of 2 years, that's pretty draconian, and I don't know how you have an attorney general who is, in essence, ineligible to serve for literally half his next term. That creates a whole bunch of issues beyond the convention, but I suspect by the time we hit the convention, we'll have an answer to some of those questions.
You are watching Indiana Issues. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the governor's agenda that he laid out for 2020. And also, speaking of 2020, what should we pay attention to? You're watching Indiana Issues from the Edge Media Studios. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. We'll be right back. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Whoops, a little bit of a spill here on Indiana Issues, but hey, that's a great part of this program. It's a conversation that takes place off camera as well as on camera.
I feel liquid.
I feel the liquids. Don't worry, it's just an old iPad. My wife's getting me a new one for Christmas. Well, she is now. So.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Our guests today are our good friends, Mark Rutherford, Libertarian, Democrat Kip Tew, Eric Berman, WIBC Radio, and Cam Spill Carter, Republican strategist. Gentlemen, Governor Eric Holcomb unveiled his agenda most recently for 2020. Talk about raising the tobacco age to 21, banning the use of cell phones, handheld while driving, making healthcare costs more transparent. I ask you, Mark Rutherford, is Eric Holcomb running as a Democrat or a Republican?
Oh, my goodness, yeah. The answer is yes, okay, if you know from my libertarian perspective on that. Wow. No, I just don't like those things. I mean, I like consistency. So if you want to make everything 21, then you can't vote till you're 21. You can't do booze till you're 21. You can't do tobacco. Although personally, I think these don't work. I'm more like France, where it's just like parents have control. Don't be a stupid person. You can drink a little bit earlier. People start drinking and smoking earlier. And it's about the pursuit of happiness. If you want to be happy by, in my personal opinion, killing yourself with cigarettes, well, you know what? Shoot, I do some stuff that other people who smoke cigarettes think stupid and probably is. So I just don't like that. I think we keep it at 18, but 18's for everything. If we're going to have people be able to go to the Army and defend us at 18, well, then you can smoke at 18, even if it's a stupid idea. That's just the way I look at it, and I wish Holcomb wasn't doing this. It's very, very much a disappointment. And there's other things you can do that are more effective than trying to ban it. I've got to tell you, I know people out there, maybe this isn't a good thing to admit, but they will love the black market for 18 to 21-year-olds. And that's what you create, and it just creates more problems than it's worth.
Cam, let me get you in here. We talk about the cell phones, tobacco age. The governor's folks will say, yes, it's part of the agenda, but we're also doing things like workforce development, things like strengthening Indiana's economic environment, doing what we can to move Hoosiers up the workforce scale, and sort of this all goes to the overall sort of quality of life theme that they've been pushing for 2020.
Yeah, I think those are a better issue matrix, if you will, going into 2020. Although the governor's in an exceptionally strong position for re-election at this point, but I'd have to agree with Mark on some of the merits of that, although we just passed through, and it's not the way you should do it, but in basically a budget resolution at the federal level, we're going to raise the age for nicotine products to 21.
That was for the sale of. This is for the possession of, right? So
Right.
I mean, there's a distinction.
There's a big difference.
There's a
Yes,
distinction.
that's correct.
I missed that nuance. Well, and I get the liberty arguments on that. He's also calling for basically a ban on the use of cell phones, and unless you have a hands-free.
Hands-free.
Hands-free. That's not so much a restriction of liberty as protecting people from other stupid people. Because I don't know how many red lights I've sit through or watched people go through while they are looking at a device and their attention is elsewhere. And
Sorry about that.
distracted driving. Well, I was
should be.
get a text from you that says I'm driving. And I'm texting you. So, but I think the workforce issues, the placemaking, to the extent that we can do that, in economic development, fulfill promises on infrastructure investment, whether it be in the digital and telecommunication sphere, in the transportation sphere. Those are good and valid. But I have to say it's a pretty thin gruel here, and it may speak to the success of the state. But I think if you look at the biggest liability, it is the education level of our workforce, so continued focus there, I think, is appropriate, and winning both on policy and political.
So, Kip, when Democrats heard the governor unveil his agenda, they're like, okay, great, 2020, here we come.
Well, I think that it's a fair thing to say that it's a very thin gruel. There's not much there. And I disagree with Cam that he's in a very strong position. I think he's in a pretty good position, but I think he should be very worried about how few people actually know him and how undefined he is as the governor. You go out on the street, nobody knows who Eric Holcomb is, and he's 3 years into his first term. So, and some of that's not his fault, but some of it is. I mean, the part that's not his fault is that Donald Trump, takes all the oxygen in politics, and so there.
And he's also following Mitch Daniels and Mike Pence.
Well, I would think following Mike Pence would be helpful for him, actually. You would have a bigger footprint, I would think. But you have to do things also to get noticed, and he hasn't really done much. And I think he's missing a real opportunity. You may say that the cigarette thing and the hands-free phones are Democratic ideas, and I'm happy to say that they are, although I kind of agree with him on cigarettes about the age. But I don't on phones. I think that we have plenty of states now where it's hands-free. I think statistics show it makes it safer. And you shouldn't be allowed to be looking at your phone and driving at the same time. That's just insane. But what he's not doing is he's not really attacking teacher pay, which I know you and I could have a long discussion about. But that is a big problem in this state, and he's pushing it off beyond the election, and I think that could hurt him.
Eric?
One of the interesting things, and our friend Nikki Kelly, I think, was the first to point this out, both on phones and on the smoking age and one or two other items on the agenda, he was at pains to point out when he rolled this out,
we're not the first.
We're not the first. We're not even second. We're like 20th, 21st. But yeah, it's a somewhat surprising agenda coming from a Republican governor. But Eric Holcomb has largely governed, for a guy who has pretty solid conservative credentials. He chaired the party. He ran for the Senate as essentially the senator that Todd Young has been, foreign policy focused, conservative outlook. But he is governed more like your Eastern centrists, your Charlie Bakers in Massachusetts, your Larry Hogans in Maryland. Stay out of national politics, keep your head down. I'm laser focused on the economy. And this is of a piece with, I think, that kind of mindset. And as far as people not knowing who he is, and we've talked about this on the show before, I really think that's largely a house effect of one poll in particular. But if we assume that that's true, that's only good news for Eric Holcomb. How many people know who Tara Klutz is? How many people know who Connie Lawson is? If people don't know who they are, they're going to pull the R lever, and that's going to be good news for Eric Holcomb.
Our guests today are our good friends Mark Rutherford, Kip Tew, Eric Berman, and Cam Carter. Gentlemen, I got just a little bit of time left here. Quick preview. We'll kind of combine these sort of next two things together. The preview of 2020 as well as our predictions and prognostications. In a nutshell, what should we be paying attention to? What are the big races that you guys are keeping an eye on in 2020? Mark, we'll just start with you and kind of go around the table.
The race that I'm looking on is the Republican primary for the 5th District. I'm seeing all types of really good people stepping up saying, I want to run. So I can't really predict who's going to do it. What I can say is that it's pretty high caliber people who are doing that. And then on the other side, that general election, I mean, I'm very familiar with southern Hamilton County, and it's Fishers and Carmel is getting a significant number of Democrats who are active and have an understanding of politics and campaigning starting to pop up there. So how's that going to change that district? It's an interesting district. I mean, the north part of it is just Republican, Republican, Republican. The southern part of the district is changing. It's becoming more Democrat.
Yep.
Well, I agree with everything he just said with respect to that, although I don't think all of the Republican candidates are well qualified. But I think you're going to have, in the short term, we're going to have a couple of very interesting primaries in the state of Indiana that we'll all be watching. We now have a 1st District primary. We've got 4 or 5 very viable candidates up there. It's going to be fascinating on our side, and it'll be fascinating to me if the Republicans actually put someone real up this time to run against them, because it's the first time there's been an open seat in so many years and makes it potentially more competitive. So that seat up there, I think, is going to be very interesting. You got, as I said, 4 or 5 Democratic candidates right now that I think any one of them could win and are viable. So that'll be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, they hit the two big ones, and I don't think there's much question about that. The 2 open seat primaries, our primaries have been much more interesting than our general elections for the last several elections. I'd throw in 2 more on that list. It's possible, although I tend to think not, but it's possible we could have a contested Democratic presidential primary in Indiana.
Sure is.
3rd time in 4 elections. That, of course, will be fascinating if it comes to pass. The other thing I'm watching, going back to what Mark said, legend has it that Keith Buellin, when he was Republican chair and the Democratic chair, looked at the map of Marion County, used to discuss, okay, when is the tipping point and how many years before Marion County becomes Democratic? Well, people are starting to have that discussion now in Hamilton County. And I don't think this is the year. But
2024, 2022.
You've got a Republican Carmel city councilman. You've got a Democrat city councilman in Carmel, 2 Democrats on the council in Fishers. The trend is there, and the question is, has it arrived enough to lift a Democrat into the 5th District? And if you want a sleeper race, your new Speaker of the House, Todd Houston's district is right in the heart of Fishers. He only won by about 10 points last time. Is the trend enough to push him out?
Yeah.
Yeah, watching both the 5th congressional district, not only the Republican primary, which probably give you a bellwether of where the president stands in Indiana, but also the 1st congressional district. I don't think Republicans have much of a chance up there, but maybe they'll put someone up because of the open seat nature of it. And watching who will succeed Brian Bosma in his district. I think both the Houston district and the Bosma district will be very interesting in the general, and who knows what's going to happen in the presidential sweepstakes, but vile and insipid stupidity on the part of many partisans is what I would predict. Would be a pretty safe prediction. It's going to be a very polarized base election, I think. And ironically, a lot of the back and forth is perhaps going to lead to, I'll go out on a limb and say we're going to see higher turnout as a result of that polarization instead of people being turned off by it. I think they're going to get out.
Here's my prediction for next year. We're all going to be gainfully employed. I can tell you that. Good. We will not want for show topics, I'll tell you that.
Not at all.
And with that, our guests today have been Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Kip Tew, Eric Berman, 93 WIBC Radio, Republican Cam Carter. Gentlemen, thank you all very, very much for being with us. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, all the other fun stuff in between. And that'll do it for Indiana Issues from the Edge Media Studios. Thank you all very much for joining us. Always good to be back. And we'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.